I figured I'd start this episode with a couple of long-term dramas, as well as giving you an advance look at the two people who I was required to work with during the remaining years of the label. The ones ultimately responsible for ruining everything and for me walking away. First, let's start with Modern Eon, Fiction Tales. As mentioned in a previous episode, I submitted the request in October 2018. I signed the deal memo in April 2019. In October 2019, I was asked several questions by the UK side, such as tentative release dates, etc. When questions are asked, it often means it's being worked and final clearance could be forthcoming. Then, we had the change in licensing contacts after my primary had his position eliminated at the end of 2019. On the one and only phone call I'd ever have with the new licensing contact in January 2020 to discuss the change in process, he said he couldn't find the Modern Eon request. This was barely 3 months after it was being worked. Around this time, a rumor started swirling that the Reissue Mafia were pursuing the album, but I couldn't find any info. In May 2020, I was told by UMG to resubmit the request, which I did in June. Then I waited, and waited, and waited. Then in May 2021, it was confirmed that Cherry Red were pursuing the album, so I sent in my cancellation request. Does anyone else find it curious that this album had been untouched for 40 years before I put in my reissue request? And then my request suddenly disappears from the system around the time rumors begin that Cherry Red might be pursuing it? And then theirs gets approved and comes out years after my initial request? There goes that unwarranted paranoia again. When their release finally came out much later in early 2023, I knew not to buy it, but asked if someone could share a CD rip of it so I can determine source material. I wanted to scream when I heard all of the vinyl noises and distortions all over the place. Once again, their budget mastering and avoidance of original masters destroyed another album that I would have done properly. Why these major labels continuously allow these third parties to use substandard source material just confirms how messed up the industry is. Quantity over quality. Well before I started my label, I hated when people would complain about Cherry Red's quality and then get attacked for it. Some people would profess sheep-like crap such as, just be glad it's available. It already was available, even if only on used vinyl. It's cattle-driven submission like this that has allowed them to continue to pump out poorly mastered from vinyl reissues for decades. One of the motivating factors of starting my own label was my experience with these UK labels, as a mastering engineer and as a consumer. This next one is the longest, drawn-out nonsense I had to deal with for the entire run of my label, a 7-year drama. As you may recall, I submitted a request to do the Torch Song album Exhibit A. I was initially informed they needed to locate the band's contract before it could move forward. It took 2 years for them to get the contract in the system, and then I signed the deal memo in September 2019. A year later, in August 2020, and after several inquiries, I was told the contract wouldn't allow any bonus material without full band approval. I attempted to contact William Orbit, but received no reply. Rumor has it, he is not fond of the 80s Torch Song material, so I anticipated a likely non-response. I reached out to singer Lori Mayer, and she responded with support of the reissues, but UMG reaffirmed I need full band approval for bonus tracks. I asked the final clearance person if I could do the CD as a 2-on-1 release with their albums Wish Thing and Exhibit A. This would at least fill up the CD with mostly unavailable on CD material. Exhibit A had been on CD before, only in Japan upon its original release in 1987, and has a huge price tag. I ended up paying $400 for it, and that's more of a midline price. I don't expect too many people would be willing to cough up that amount for a CD, so I thought my idea would be a great option to improve upon it by doubling the content. I was told to resubmit the request in the new configuration and start all over. More than a year later, in November 2021, and after more inquiries, I was told by the final clearance person that she had looked at the contract again, and even the 2-on-1 concept would require full band approval. You couldn't have told me that over a year ago when you had the contract in your face and I was asking you about this? What the hell's wrong with you? She now says the only thing I can release without band consent are straight individual reissues. I decided to move forward with that idea and made a minor retail price adjustment of $1 less to help compensate prospective buyers for the lack of bonus material. She said this will need a quick re-review by my primary contact, and then I should receive the clearances. At this point, she said those clearances should come just after the new year, if not before their annual 2-week holiday break. That's right. These labels get a whole 2 weeks off at the end of the year. I don't know if that's a California thing or a music business thing, but here in Ohio, we don't get Princess time like that. We's gots to work, with maybe Christmas and New Year's Day off. What I would eventually come to find is that my new primary licensing contact had tons of time off. Sometimes it seemed I'd get his out-of-office message more often than not. It's hard to feel bad for someone's workload when they only work about 2/3 of the year, at best. Now, back to our story. I checked in with Miss Final Clearance during January 2022 on these allegedly forthcoming Torch song clearances. No response. So I checked in with my primary contact. No response. Over the next couple of months, I would try to check in a couple of more times with both of them. No response. Is anyone else getting Sony flashbacks? Out of desperation, in March 2022, I resubmitted both requests from scratch. No response. Throughout the next 2 years, I would occasionally send inquiries on these albums. I never got a single response from either of them on this subject after the late 2021 message telling me to expect the clearances in January 22. These are the two primary people required for reissue clearances in the USA. The primary contact gets the process started. The final clearance person finishes it off after other departments have signed off on the in-between. I understand the Torch song albums would have limited appeal, but I really wanted to do them. I would refer to titles like these as vanity projects because they were more so being done out of love for the music rather than large sales potential. I would sprinkle these in amongst other titles I had more confidence in. For anyone unfamiliar with Torch Song, I discovered them in 1984 when MTV were airing their music video Don't Look Now from their debut album Wish Thing.
Don't look now, 'cause you might be flying. Don't look down, you gotta keep trying. Just when you feel the flow, you know the way to go. Don't look now, what you're not about.
They released a second album in 1986 called Ecstasy, but it only came out in the UK. The 1987 album called Exhibit A is a compilation of some tracks from Ecstasy, as well as remixes of some of the songs from Wish Thing. The band were also known for doing a lot of radically altered cover versions. Their hysterically demented cover of Ode to Billy Joe is a highlight, with Lori Mayer adding a southern twang to her usual angelically gorgeous voice.
Brother said he recollect when he and Tom and Billy Joe put a frog down my back at the Carroll County Picture Show.
They would also do more serious covers, like the trippy take on the Blind Faith song Can't Find My Way Home.
Come down on your own and leave your body alone. Somebody must change.
My personal favorite, and possibly my favorite Torch song, is the cover of The Line's 1978 single, White Knight.
Let's stay far away from home. I can't take a
I have no idea why William Orbit views these albums negatively, but he should get over it. The band released one album in the 90s called Towards the Unknown Region. I bought it blindly because I was a fan of the band, but when I played it, I thought it had the wrong music on the CD. Where's that beautiful voice? It sounded nothing like Torch Song. It was mainly instrumental and what I viewed as experimental doodles. No thank you. Since I was given such a confident assurance that final clearances were forthcoming in a very short time, this turned out to be another foolishly optimistic case where I already had the artwork nearly completed well before the time I realized that I had been misled once again by this dynamic, incompetent licensing duo. When digging these out, I had forgotten I prepared sleeve notes in a discography. Going back through this tormenting time capsule of information to prepare these episodes has shown me that I've been much more patient and tolerant than I would have given myself credit for. Either that or I'm a complete masochistic idiot. What an absolute shame that the incompetence of UMG licensing and their inability to follow through with the clearances I was told were forthcoming years earlier have kept even the band's basic albums from being lovingly reissued. But to go through 7 years of delays and restarts only to end up with nothing in the end shows just how horrendous and arrogant the people in the prime positions are. Around the time the Berlin Love Life CD came out is when COVID hit and the world began to grind to a halt. With the weird apocalyptic feeling that was in the air as fights were breaking out over toilet paper at a Walmart near you, I just assumed that might be it for the label, if not the world. Imagine my surprise when I received final clearance for the Divinyls album Desperate on March 31st. Okay. I wondered if sales would continue when everyone was concerned with more important things, but it didn't seem that my sales of existing titles were being affected at all. Divinyls were one of those bands I remembered when MTV were playing the Boys in Town video back in the early 80s, but they weren't a band I pursued. In 1990, I was at a record store and saw the Desperate album on CD, which I believe was a new reissue at the time. I bought it on a whim based on my memory of that one song with the glowing mic stand in the video and the singer with the Chrissy Hind hair in front of her eyes.
I was always driving home. Oh, the boys in town.
I quickly found a number of songs on the album that were immediate favorites. Besides the obvious Boys in Town, there was also Science Fiction, which I didn't even know had a video at the time.
I thought love was science fiction until I...
Having seen the CD coming and going out of print over the years, and only recently having obtained the Australian CD for $90 because it had exclusive tracks, I thought this could be a chance to make an all-encompassing reissue. One of the things I had been led to believe from the labels I had worked with in the past was that master tape transfers were to be my expense. Yet, 12 titles in, I had yet to be charged for any master transfers. I would eventually find those costs were included in the quotes I had received, something Sony had indicated. That would change for this release because the UMG transfer facilities were closed and the tapes were being sent to an independent engineer that I would be paying directly. This was my first title under the new license out deal, and the general license fee for the master rights would regularly be around $2,200 to $2,500. For the Divinyls CD, I needed a total of 4 tapes transferred, and that cost came to $600. Publishing, manufacturing, and shipping would be additional costs. When I submitted the artwork, I ran into a snag. The final clearance person, who reviews the artwork and approves or requests changes, said she was fine with it. But the primary contact came back and asked for changes. I originally had some images from a poster sleeve single included under the CD tray and in the booklet. He said that's the problem. If I just include images of the single sleeves are related, that's fine. But if I try to take a portion and repurpose it into something completely different, that's where things can get questionable. So, I modified my artwork with the trusty single sleeves under the tray and sent it back in for final review. It ended up taking nearly a month and a few follow-ups to finally get approval for this minor change. I was continuing to get concerned about this new process because everything seemed to be slower. For clarification, these two in licensing were always involved in the previous reissues. The guy who got the boot at the end of 2019 was more like a facilitator forwarding the request to them. Why each of these steps is now taking much longer than before could be up to speculation, but I had a strong suspicion that with these people involved in this part of the process now working from home, it wasn't speeding up anyone's productivity. That would only be confirmed by the waits continuing to worsen over the next 4 years as they continue to work from home. If you can't keep up, get back to the office. I looked around at a few manufacturing options, and I ended up with disc makers. I liked their easy and straightforward project price calculator. It didn't take too long for the manufacturing, and I was mostly satisfied with the final product. I say mostly because they use digital printing for the booklet and inserts. This uses a firmer paper, and the ink tends to scratch off easier than using standard offset printing presses. I had the publishing done through EasySong Licensing, and it was, in fact, EasySong Licensing. The CD was released on June 5th, 2020, and it sold pretty well. Once it went into distribution, it sold relatively quickly, enough so that I went into a second pressing. By this point, I had moved on to another CD manufacturer, the one I would use on most of my future titles, Copycats, part of the ADS group. My main motivation with them is they used offset printing, and I was already familiar with their products since UMG switched over to them during the last of the finished goods deals. For this second pressing, I made some minor changes. People had been telling me the credits for the live track being listed as recorded at the Spit in Barton, which is how it was listed on the original single, was incorrect because the Spit is in Boston. Aside from changing that, I also included text on the back to show where each of the tracks was originally released. That and the thicker digitally printed inserts are how you'd know if you have the first or second pressing. There were some complaints that I didn't format the CD in the same running order as the original Australian edition. To be frank, I prefer the USA running order. Either way, all the alternate tracks from the Australian edition were included as bonus tracks. Can't please everyone. Just over 2 weeks after the Divinyls CD clearance came through, I was cleared for my 22-track Fingerprintz custom compilation. Yes, Fingerprintz are another band I discovered through Trouser Press. Although, the album I picked up on one of my shopping trips was the first one. And I wasn't particularly thrilled with it at the time, and I parted with it. A couple of years later, I would see their music video, called Shadowed, on one of the Rock America VHS tapes I would receive, and I liked that one. I bought that album, which was their third and final. Since I liked it, I pursued the other two albums and learned to appreciate parts of the debut album after all. The band had these 3 albums and a bunch of singles released between 1979 and 1981, yet never had an official CD release of any kind. Their 3 original albums were all very different from one another. The first one had a post-punk feel, the second one was power pop, the third one was all over the place with experimental oddities mixed with suave melodies with a lighter touch to straight-ahead dance tracks. I tried to do a good cross-section of each album, mixing in some B-sides and remixes for variety. I had this idea of creating the artwork to look like an abandoned home with aged pictures of the band crooked on the wall. I set out to compile this idea with torn wallpaper with areas of exposed walls. This was to portray the band's catalog having been neglected for so many years. For the masters, I worked with both sides. The USA was now back to transferring tapes in-house, so I was able to get 2 full albums and 1 single master transferred without any further expense. But the UK side was still sending tapes off-site. For the various tapes I needed transferred, this came to over $700. I wouldn't call this a show-stopping amount, So why Cherry Red make great efforts to avoiding using masters is maybe because of greed, or maybe they're just cheap. But who's to even say they would even be billed under normal circumstances? Since it was a 22-track collection, the publishing was on the high end at over $2,200. I hoped this one would make its money back. I originally thought a bunch of tracks were going to have to come from vinyl because my USA archive contact couldn't find much at all in the way of masters on the UK side. When I asked the UK if there really was nothing, they informed me that the EMI tapes, which includes the Virgin catalog, are stored in a different archive called the Hayes Vault. My USA contact would not have access to this. There were specific people who worked in that archive, and they were able to send me a list of masters. Oh wow! Not only did they have everything, they have tons of previously unreleased material. I was put in contact with the band's leader, Jim O'Neill, by someone who saw news of my upcoming release. Jim was happy to be involved, though disappointed he was not part of the track selection and artwork design. He made it clear he did not at all like their debut single, Dancing with Myself, and wouldn't have included it. I'm one of those who feels the first single is always important, even if it's not great. But the tracks were already approved and confirmed, so there was no chance of making any changes at this point. He was also kinda meh about my artwork design, and said he'd have done something black and white, similar to their final album, Beat Noir. Meh. I shared with him the list of masters, and we talked about all of the unreleased material, which included their original debut album with their first singer, who did the vocals on the first single and subsequent 4-track EP. This album would never be released in full, with the 4-track EP being the only songs to come out of it. We set about going back and forth over a period as he provided a history of the band that I put together into sleeve notes for an expanded 12-page booklet design. It was all very pleasant, and the hope was that if the compilation did well enough, we would revisit the idea of possibly doing all the albums and unreleased stuff. When I submitted the artwork for review, I wondered if it would clear because of the way I used images from the original albums. While it took another few weeks to get a reply, it was approved without issue. Cool. The remastering took a bit longer, as some of the tapes were not in great shape. I probably spent the most time trying to resolve all of the dips and dropouts in the debut single, Dancing with Myself, than with anything else. If I had the chance to do it again, I likely would have just remastered that one from my original 12-inch single. My only regret with the track listing is I would swap one of the later period tracks for another from the first album, but that's hindsight for you. I was still using disc makers at this point, and this would be the one to start pushing me towards another manufacturer. Since the 12-page booklet was thicker, it would scrape the tabs of the jewel case as it was removed, and since it was a digital print, the ink would start to scratch off. That's a problem. Bulletproof Heart, the best of Fingerprintz, was released on July 3rd, 2020.
Who's your friend? Who's a little innocent? Who's your friend? You need a bulletproof heart.
No one home right here. Man, the others fuck the beat.
The initial sales were okay, but not to the level I had become accustomed to with the last several releases. When I put it into distribution, my distributor said he felt this one was going to do very well. I wasn't so sure. In the end, it struggled to move the single 1,000 unit pressing, even as I dropped the price as low as $7.99 from $14.99. This made me put the idea of the individual albums on the back shelf. I am still very satisfied with the artwork design. I was learning as I went, but I think it holds up. Aside from a couple of minor misspellings in the notes, I'm still pretty pleased with it. But this took me back to the Artery compilation I put together for Cherry Red in 2006, because there is no satisfying everyone with a compilation album. People were complaining online about this release being a failure because their personal favorite Fingerprintz song was not included, or that they don't like the later material and I should have focused more on the earlier stuff. I say, feel free to put in a license request, wait an eternity, and then do it the way you see fit. One thing that might have played a part in the sales was that another Fingerprintz compilation had just come out around the same time as mine, but it was not officially licensed and was poorly mastered entirely from vinyl. The culprit was once a legit label doing reissues in the 1990s, but after disappearing for a while, they returned, taking the defiant stance to put out tons of unlicensed reissues, either on streaming or download, claiming ownership, or producing CD or LP editions, all completely unlicensed and unofficial. I sent him a message around this time calling him out. He claimed he had licensed the CD, which I knew was a lie because the legal lines on his package was in no way the format UMG uses or would approve. I notified UMG of this product and that the label was marketing other UMG-owned artists as their own and monetizing them all over the internet. UMG never replied. Later on, when I pulled an LP reissue by Planet P Project that I had been waiting on because this fake label had just started manufacturing their own unlicensed LP reissues, I also notified UMG and sent them links. No response. A while later, when I was having an exchange with someone at Sony after they also changed to license deals, which meant the headache sales manager was no longer the first point of contact, the topic of this label came up since they were also claiming Sony-owned artists as their own. She told me they were well aware of this label and their practices. The impression I got is that neither of these majors viewed it as enough of a concern to be worth their time, considering the low-profile artists this guy was choosing to essentially bootleg. In my later years, I couldn't help but wonder if perhaps he had the right idea all along, since he wasn't putting himself through the chore of trying to work with the corporate monsters who don't seem to care either way. This doesn't seem to concern most manufacturers either. The way physical media manufacturers are supposed to operate for their own safety is to require proof of ownership or licensing before committing to manufacturing. During my years, I encountered only one manufacturer, that being copycats, who required I provide this documentation for every title I would eventually submit to them. I even offered this documentation to a manufacturer in Canada I worked with for a time for vinyl manufacturing. They said they didn't need it. Very early on when starting my label, another label that I had worked with warned me to be prepared to have some of my ideas stolen by the majors. They said they've been through situations where they'd submit a project, receive a denial, and then it comes out in the same configuration as they submitted. Pretty nasty. In May 2020, I submitted a CD reissue request for the 1979 album by Cowboys International titled The Original Sin, along with a bunch of bonus tracks. The album had recently shown up on streaming services, but I wanted to go further with all of the non-album singles and B-sides. Upon inquiring in August 2020, I was told the UK had asked me for specific details about all of the bonus tracks because they had none of it in their system. I provided all of the catalog numbers and the single details, and also included Discogs links for each. A little while later, someone informed me that all of the band's singles had just been posted to streaming services by Universal. Apparently, they took all of the information I provided them, pulled the tapes, and posted everything, minus one track, online while still not providing me a clearance to do the CD. At this point, I was pretty disgusted with these tactics and soon pulled my CD request. Guess what finger I'm holding up? I guess, on the plus side, at least it all came from masters rather than vinyl. Here's another. Earlier in 2020, I thought I'd take a chance with a Susie and the Banshees vinyl reissue request. I had little expectation of receiving a clearance, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to try. The Banshees are, and will always be, my favorite band. Aside from a few dud songs, peekaboo! Their catalog is the most stunning amount of top-quality music and ideas than any other artist, IMHO. But in another Don't Meet Your Hero situation, I had a long-standing online conflict with Steven Severin of the band since 2004, when I posted online about issues with their B-sides box set called Downside Up. From there, he and I were oil and water for many, many years. I think he's one of the most talented musicians and songwriters that the world will likely ever see, but I don't expect we'll be meeting up on holiday anytime soon. My request was their 1981 singles collection called Once Upon a Time. This had been skipped from their earlier vinyl reissue program, so I thought I'd try to fill the void. My request was to do the LP on clear vinyl. In August 2020, I received notice that the Banshees and the earlier Creatures reissue requests were both, quote, denied by artist management. In December 2020, UMG reissued Once Upon a Time. And on clear vinyl. Couldn't you just die? If I had to come up with a couple of dream projects, the first would be to do the Banshees Downside Up collection, newly remastered by yours truly for a new CD and multicolored vinyl box set. Considering the earlier Divinyls, I didn't bother sending in a request. But I would have done it. The other dream project would be the debut album by Duran Duran. The last remaster was in 2010, and it was the most awful sounding remaster I've ever heard, which remains to this day. Fans were enraged online, and the amount of scathing reviews on Amazon were increasing by the minute. Anyone calling out the engineer responsible by name were among those who had their reviews pulled down. Trust me. 15 years later, Warner are still trotting out that unlistenable abomination for repeated LP and CD reissues. Talk about not giving the slightest concern to quality. I did ask Warner back in 2017 if the band's catalog would be an option for third-party labels. I was told no. In April 2020, I tried to follow up on the Berlin Pleasure Victim CD reissue. I requested this at the same time as their Love Life album, but was told this one had a couple of songs that needed to be run by the UK side. That was originally in late 2019, and then reiterated in April 2020. Well, get on with it. By June 2020, I still hadn't heard anything back. I started sending inquiries, and in an effort to make things easier for them, I would include the full list of outstanding requests with priority status, since I did have a fair amount in at the time. When I first started the label, I took a conservative approach out of fear I could possibly be investing in a money pit. But as titles were released and sales gradually picked up, I wasn't going down, more so than maintaining, or even slightly profiting. Slightly. The fact that I did all of my own work with the audio and artwork saved on expenses for sure, but I was still doing the work, and if this broke down to an hourly wage, I would be well under the minimum. I got the final clearance on June 26, 2020, but there was a problem. She had missed a song, the Euro single remix of the Metro. I immediately followed up about this track. No response. I decided just to move forward with the project and have the tapes requested. I got an original album master and some of the mixes from the USA side, but needed a couple of tapes from the UK side as well. 2 weeks later, I was asked by the contract administrator for a release date. I attempted to follow up again with Miss Final Clearance and copied my primary contact and the contract admin in an effort to get a response. It worked, and she finally responds the next day asking for the same info about the track I had just sent her 2 weeks earlier. I finally got the updated clearance on July 27th, and by this time I already had all of the master transfers. What I would ultimately find with this person over the years is that if a clearance has even the slightest possible hang-up, she will put it aside and forget about it, and hope you do too. I would soon come to see her as my nemesis, or, in another scenario, my bratty little sister. I would eventually feel like we had a sibling rivalry, and my primary contact, her boss, would become like Dad having to intervene time and time again to get her to snap out of her attitude. But he had his own issues. I could send 10 messages over the span of several months and be lucky to get one half-assed response. When it came to source material, it appeared the 2008 fire had some impact again. The Sex 12-inch master was no longer available in the USA archive, so I got a copy from the UK. There were no single masters for Masquerade, so the 7-inch mix came from vinyl, and the extended mix came from the original Japanese Dancing in Berlin Remixes CD. I did the artwork similar to Love Life, faithfully reproducing the original LP contents with single sleeves and label scans. Pleasure Victim was released on September 4th, 2020. The CD sold well, and once it moved into distribution, it sold out quickly.
I remember a soldier sleeping next to me, but I'm sure you'll come and join the masquerade.
This first pressing would be my last with disc makers. Aside from not being happy with the digitally printed inserts, many copies of this CD that I opened showed a residue on the play surface. It could be easily cleaned off, but it was the last excuse I needed to change manufacturers. The CD would eventually move into 2 more 1,000 unit pressings, so around 3,000 copies are out there. The differences between the first and later pressings are minimal. Aside from the inserts being done on offset printers for the second and third pressings, I made a few minor alterations to the booklet. For the audio, there was one vinyl click that I missed in the Masquerade single mix, and someone picked up on it, despite its subtlety. I removed that click for the subsequent pressings. A few years before my CDs came out, another label had received clearances for the albums, along with some Wang Chung albums, for basic reissues and put them up for pre-order. A lot of people ordered them, but then the label just disappeared. Some people were pissed because they never got refunded for their pre-orders. Some people confused me for being that dubious label and wrote angry messages. I assured them it wasn't me. But what a crappy thing to do. When the Love Life CD started selling well, I put in a request to do the Count 3 and Pray album in June 2020. I picked up a copy again for myself and found some good songs. It was far from their best work, but I figured it would be worthwhile. My primary contact dropped the ball on this one. After several inquiries, he found my request sitting in his inbox in January 2021 and finally started the clearance process. Because of his delay, I missed the window. It was denied in April 2021. Had he submitted it sooner, it would have cleared, but it turned out the catalog had now been turned off from third-party licensing because UMG were reviewing if they wanted to do anything with it. In the end, the only thing that came out was a substandard colored vinyl reissue of the Pleasure Victim album in 2023. I say substandard because upon reviewing it, they used the old 80s CD as source material, not even the new high-resolution transfer I had done in 2020. Quick and dirty. I do regret buying it, and it certainly wasn't worth the $30 price tag. When I checked again on the catalog availability status in early 2024, I was told it had opened again and I could submit new requests. I quickly put together a 2-CD edition of Count 3 and Pray with all related single and 12-inch remixes, and all of those unreleased songs I found earlier. I also requested to do the Best of Berlin album on colored vinyl. Considering my label would shut down in July 2024, these requests didn't have a chance to be processed. In April 2020, I submitted requests to do the 3 original albums by Missing Persons. Spring Session M from 1982, Rhyme and Reason from 1984, Color in Your Life from 1986. I inquired about them in August and was told they shouldn't present any issues. After another inquiry in October, I received final clearances for all 3 albums. I asked my guy in the archives for a master list. This was something I wish I had done before making the requests, because I found an unreleased single remix of the song Color in Your Life. But now it was too late. I discovered Missing Persons in 1982 when MTV were playing two of their videos, Words and Mental Hopscotch.
There was an audible, but I have my doubts that you realize. So dumb to say you will, so dumb to say you won't. You always keep me waiting, hesitating, hating.
My girlfriend down the street, she was 10 and I was 12, was a big fan of Mental Hopscotch. When the album Spring Session M came out later that year and I got it for Christmas, I was disappointed that Mental Hopscotch wasn't on it. I would find out from the guy who ran the record store that I frequented, the song was only on a now out-of-print 4-track EP. This record store was extremely important to me during the early to mid-'80s. It was in a bad part of Lorain, Ohio, and it was originally called Sound Sensations, and then the name changed to North Coast Records. The guy who ran the store was named Dave, and he was such a nice guy to the chubby little awkward kid always coming in buying these weirdo new wave records. He used to give me discounts for no other reason than just to be a nice guy. And when he ran across a copy of the Missing Persons EP on cassette, he sold it to me for $1 or $2. In late 2020, I revisited the long-since condemned shopping center where the store once was. I looked in the windows of this empty storefront and recalled exactly how it used to be laid out. Not long after these pictures were taken, demolition began on parts of the strip mall. I requested the tapes for transfer. They were coming from a couple of different locations, but I eventually got everything. This project would continue to confirm that as long as tapes are transferred in-house or with Iron Mountain, I would not receive any charge for the transfers, which was great because with large projects like this requiring a fair amount of tape transfers, it would have been pricey. Unlike the previous finished goods deals, the new license out deals do not include an additional amount for tape transfers. Whether this was by design or someone's oversight, I was perfectly fine with it. There was only one master tape in the vast list for side 2 of Color in Your Life. Previous CD reissues always seemed to lop off the first drum beat of the opening track, Go Against the Flow. I can confirm that error is, in fact, in this, the only master tape listed for that side of the album. I did a very simple edit to repair the missed note, something that could have very easily been done with the previous CD reissues. Doing the artwork for 2 of the 3 CDs was a bit tricky. For those familiar with the earlier CD reissues on the One Way label, you might recall that Spring Session M and Color in Your Life had borders around them. The reason is because the artwork needs to fill out a bleed area, and if the original LP has text too close to the edge and you pull that into the bleed area, it will cut off. In these cases, it was compensated for by adding borders. What I would always do is create part of the artwork that doesn't exist, attempting to clone, brush, and stretch additional parts of the images so I can keep the full original album cover within the safety lines of the template and prevent cropping. You might notice on a lot of LP reissues these days that the covers are often cropped into a portion of the original image. Unless the original album cover has a solid color that these labels can easily stretch into the bleed areas, most of the time, they'll make no effort and just crop part of the image off, as long as it doesn't affect the text. I kept the artwork consistent with all of my previous reissues in that I tried to create 8-page booklets where possible, utilizing lyrics and original inner sleeve artwork, single sleeves, and label scans. As I was working on these, I came up with the idea of creating a slipcase to house the albums. The idea I had was to use elements of all of their releases for the artwork. I chose the band name text from the original debut EP, the shapes from the back of the Spring Session M album, band photos from Rhyme and Reason to replace those in the shapes, and a color bar under the title in the order from Color in Your Life. To keep it problem-free, I tracked down the business currently overseeing the Rhyme and Reason photographer's estate, since he had passed away. I shared with them my design, and I relicensed those photos to be able to achieve what I wanted. I figured better safe than sorry. The plan for the slipcase was to be a website exclusive limited to the first 500 copies. I ran the art by Universal, and they asked if the slipcase was going to impact my pricing. I told them I intended to add the slipcase at cost, so there would be no additional profit from it rather than breaking even. The slipcases came to about $7 a piece, which was much more than I expected. But I wanted to do something special for these albums. After I received stock of the albums, I realized that I had incorrectly oriented the Color in Your Life artwork to have Patrick O'Hearn at the top corner instead of Dale Bozio. I was amazed this made it past me, and it really bugged me. I figured if it went into a second pressing, I'd fix it then. But since my OCD was bugging me, I corrected all of the artwork elements and placed a new order for the CD. I decided I would sell the one with the proper orientation on my website and include it in the box set, and send the one with the alternative orientation into distribution. I had no idea how this, the least popular of the three albums, would sell, so I accepted that I might end up with overstock. I released all three albums individually, as well as the website-only slipcase box set, on January 8th, 2021.
And I don't even know the time of day. I guess it doesn't matter. Walking in LA, nobody walks in LA. Just right now, I'm only guessing. So let me know, surrender your heart. What I can't see is the only way that I can't think about dancing and think about. I just think about you. I wanna be the girl that's in your life, and you make.
I had attempted to reach out to all 5 original band members to see if they wanted copies. I only got responses from singer Dale Bozio and keyboardist Chuck Wild and sent them each copies. Sales immediately exploded, and I found myself insanely packing and shipping non-stop for weeks. These would turn out to be my quickest sellers, with Spring Session M eventually holding the record for my biggest selling title of my entire catalog, with roughly 4,500 copies sold before the 3-year contract expired. The way these license out deals work is the initial advance amount is for the first 1,000 units, but if you move on to additional pressings, you are to send payments every 6 months. I was sending Universal large amounts every 6 months in an effort to prove my reliability as a client and hope to secure an improved relationship for future projects. In the end, it didn't make the slightest impact, and they continued to become increasingly challenging to deal with. Rhyme and Reason and Color in Your Life sold less than Spring Session M, but they both achieved roughly 2,000 units, and I was able to part with all of my Color in Your Life stock after all. A lot of people smack down Color in Your Life, and I don't get it. It does have a few duds, but Dale's voice sounds better than ever, and there are some amazing songs on this album. It might even be my favorite of the 3, though I love them all. The bonus tracks all keep in context with the albums. Spring Session M has the best, with the EP tracks appended, along with Action Reaction. This song dates from 1980, the same year as the original release of the debut EP when it was on 7-inch, first released through an indie label.
Action, reaction, the girl knows just what to do.
When going through the list of masters, it was clear this recording was being considered for the second album, Rhyme and Reason. I'm glad they changed their mind, because it would have stuck out so oddly with the other tracks. The master for the shelved 12-inch mix of my personal favorite Rhyme and Reason track, If Only for the Moment, also included a previously unreleased dub mix that was intended for the B-side. Originally, even before the CD reissue requests, I asked to do a Missing Persons colored vinyl singles collection where I was going to include all of the single edits. It was eventually denied in August 2020. When I asked why, I was told they wouldn't approve custom compilations for vinyl, but would for CD. I'm not sure what the idiot logic is there, but okay. I resubmitted it as an expanded CD edition, and since I now knew about the unreleased Color in Your Life single remix, that was obviously part of the request. And it only took about 4 years to eventually receive the denial on the CD too. I don't know the reason, but since this came in March 2024, the end was already nearing. On October 6th, 2020, I received final clearance for the second Divinyls album, What a Life, originally released in 1985. This was the album that gave Divinyls their first minor bit of USA chart success with the single Pleasure and Pain. In her autobiography, the late Chrissy Amphlett states she's never watched the music video because she felt her performance was way over the top. It was, but that's part of the charm. Part of the appeal of the band, at least for me, was Chrissy's wacky, crazy, spastic onstage antics. But then I've always been drawn to people who are naturally odd, rather than putting it on. Being an oddball myself, I can tell when someone's just trying to be weird. Chrissy was fascinating. Her brutal passing in 2013 after years of dealing with MS and then breast cancer is endlessly heartbreaking to think about. She was such a unique force, but life wasn't going to be her ally. Chrissy's hardships and the fact that the band are known in the USA primarily for that Damn I Touch Myself song were motivating factors in me pursuing the catalog. They deserved much more than they got, and my efforts to make available deluxe editions of their albums was my effort to do my little part to keep the torch burning. Like their debut album Desperate, the USA edition of What a Life was radically different than the Australian counterpart. In the USA, 4 songs were cut from the album, and 3 of the songs that had been removed from the original Desperate were remixed and included. As before, my goal was to make a package that included all of the respective tracks. Now that I had the Divinyls master list, I was able to include a few more surprises. Since the band's contract was wide open, I was able to select outtakes for bonus tracks. Having no idea if they were any good, I was taking a chance. But after being able to review the master transfers of these songs, it all worked out well. 2 of the outtakes came from the Desperate album sessions, including an early take of the title track, What a Life, and a song called Out of Time, which would be resurrected and redone during the sessions for their 1988 album, Temperamental.
Sorry, it's taken me a while. It's just my writing style.
The real highlight was a What a Life outtake titled More to Choose. I had no idea if this was a complete song, an instrumental, or a sketch, but I requested it nonetheless. I was overjoyed when I heard it and loved it. It was an extremely catchy, fully complete song from an album session in 1984.
You're so static, so erratic, pneumatic.
The album was known to have been a real chore to complete. Album sessions were started and stopped with a batch of different producers before enough material was completed to put out an album. While not as good as the debut, it doesn't sound as disjointed as one would expect when going through such difficulties to complete it. It does contain my personal favorite Divinyls song and single, the sadly prophetic Good Die Young. Since I had both the USA and Australian editions of the LP, both of which had custom lyric inner sleeves, I was able to include all of that in the 8-page booklet. The amount of masters that needed transferred was huge, with many of the extra tracks being on individual tapes. On the occasions when I had been billed for the master transfers, it has nothing to do with how many songs are on the tape. It's about each tape as a flat fee, whether it's 1 song or 8 songs. Had this been one of those projects I would have been billed for, it would have at least been a couple $1,000s. What a Life was released alongside the Missing Persons reissues on January 8th, 2021.
It's a fine line between pleasure and pain. You've done it once, you could miss me if you do too. I confess.
The initial sales were really good, especially when moving into distribution, and the first pressing sold out in no time. For the second pressing, I took the opportunity to adjust some things with the artwork. The pinks were too strong in much of the packaging, so I toned it down. I also realized that I had the expanded edition backwards compared to other reissues I had done. I flipped it for the repress. While sales of the first pressing were swift, the second pressing slowed quickly, and it was a very gradual movement of stock. Even though this one had greater commercial success than their debut album, Desperate would be the best and fastest selling of my full eventual Divinyls reissue program. After What a Life came out, I received an email from Mark McEntee's wife. Mark was the band's guitarist and songwriter and was romantically involved with Chrissy for many years. Mark's wife asked who gave me permission to sell these Divinyls reissues. Here we go again. Or so I thought. When I explained to her that I licensed these from Universal, she wished me luck with the sales, but did ask to have contact info for Universal to ask about royalties, which I gave her. The feedback from fans on the reissue was very enthusiastic. Having doubled in size with 10 bonus tracks, there was a lot to dig into. But there was one person not so happy. Chrissy Amphlett's widower was very against the idea of me using outtakes and made that known. I found this reaction very different to when he was appreciative with my Desperate reissue. Despite his dissatisfaction with my choosing to use previously unreleased material, he didn't seem to see any positive with what I was trying to do for the band. To him, it appeared to be a glass half empty. As a fan, I love hearing unreleased songs and versions from favorite bands, especially when it turns out to be quality material. Some artists like to keep those songs hidden away if their contract allows it, while others are happy to share. Just look at all of the Cure reissues where Robert Smith essentially dumps the entire contents of his purse out on the table and gives fans everything, regardless of sound quality or the completeness of each track. Much of it would turn out to be little more than one-time listen curiosities, but there was occasional gold scattered throughout. I would always prefer to have all rather than nothing.